Today on Landline, we go deep down a potash mine.
It's really warm too. It's 27 degrees year round. But what really blows my mind is the fact that this mineral coming out here will be exported to almost every continent around the globe.
And visit the saleyards doing big business in tourism.
We call it game day. So all the preparation that's gone on with our clients, working out our markets, what best suits, where we need to sell.
And the woman helping look after the stock in the live export trade.
Some of the exporters had mentioned to me, you should jump on a ship and give it a go. We think you'd be good. And that's how I started, is they put me on a ship. I think I took, I can't remember now if it was 26,000 a head up to Jakarta and Panjang. Oh, perfect.
Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Farmers will need to produce 70% more food to feed the world by the middle of this century. Fertiliser has been and still is a key driver of production. But as National Rural reporter Kath Sullivan reports, there are concerns about the environmental impacts of commercial fertilisers. Here in Canada's Saskatchewan province,
it's a great day for making potash.
We're travelling a kilometre underground. It takes 4 minutes in the cage to reach the mine floor.
So your ears might start to pop a little bit?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing as a dive tank.
Follow us. Watch your step.
And another half hour travelling in these electric vehicles to reach the face of this potash mine.
What potash is, it's KCl.
Potash is a rich source of potassium. It can be used in detergents and pharmaceuticals, but by far its most common use is in fertilisers. In recent years, almost a third of the globe's potash has come from Canada, from mines just like this one. Chad Litzenberger is the mine's superintendent.
This mining machine is a $30 million mining machine and setup that chews the face, cuts the ore, puts it into a conveyor system in the front, and ultimately starts to convey it into the conveyor belt system to get to the shaft. It's one of 10 boring machines operating at this site alone. Yeah, you can feel the heat coming off the metal, and this machine is putting some significant horsepower into the face. I believe it's 700 horsepower on each arm, just chewing away at creating crushed ore. Chewing away up to 900 tonnes of ore an hour. The ore is about 40% potash, 5% clay, and 55% sodium chloride, or salt.
The ground underneath is incredibly soft, a little bit like walking on sand at the beach. We've got to watch out for some of these cables. It's really warm too. It's 27 degrees year round. But what really blows my mind is the fact that this mineral coming out here will be exported to almost every continent around the globe.
And that's helping farmers to feed millions of people. For Chad, a trip to India some years ago highlighted the impact of using fertilisers such as potash.
I can remember one conversation where one of the farmers said they are growing their crops and having a nine-time yield increase. And as he was talking about this, I asked him, well, what do you do with all the extra material? And he said he had so much that he actually bought a grain bin. And I'm a Saskatchewan farm background kid, so I'm looking around for a 20,000 bushel bin, and I couldn't see it anywhere. And I finally asked him, where's your grain bin? And he said, well, you're leaning on it. And there's this barrel, a 200-liter barrel. And it was starting to hit me that,
That's
the amount...
That's more like a garbage bin.
Exactly. And so then I asked him what he does with all the extra, assuming that he would sell it on the market or buy something, and he said, well, we eat more. And this is when it hit me, of the purpose that we do here, the agriculture sector that we're in. And so sometimes I feel like we get a little disconnected from the day-to-day activities and what we're doing in a mining operation, but the purpose that we have is to truly support feeding the world.
About half the food produced on the planet is grown using commercial fertilisers, primarily made up of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, or NP and K. But it comes at a cost to the environment.
There's greenhouse gas emissions, both pre-farm, on-farm, and also through post-farm activities, including through waste distribution. We have environmental impacts, which include eutrophication of waterways. That's increased nitrogen in the waterways, which can increase algal blooms, and sometimes acidification of soils associated with fertiliser application.
Mark Howden is Director of the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at the Australian National University. He says the application of nitrogen fertilisers contributes a little under 3% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions.
In Australia, roughly speaking, in agriculture, about 14 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents a year. So that's a few percent of our total emissions. So it's significant, but it's not a massive contributor like, say, our electricity system. With other fertilisers, such as phosphate fertilisers, you don't get those same greenhouse gases on farm, but they still have an energy footprint, so during their mining and processing and distribution of those. So different fertilisers have different footprints effectively.
Those footprints are leading some governments to impose restrictions. In 2021, Sri Lanka banned all commercial fertilisers. New Zealand's recently capped nitrogen use on its farms. And in the Netherlands, the government is buying back farms over concerns about nitrogen runoff.
So in Sri Lanka, that was largely a function of foreign currency limitations and the ability to buy in those fertilisers, which then got very politicised. And that was a big problem because it drove down food production in Sri Lanka. If you look at, say, the Netherlands or New Zealand, the big drive there is particularly groundwater pollution and river pollution. So it's nitrogen in the groundwater and in the river systems.
In Canada, a country with similar production systems to Australia, the policy is different again. 3 years ago, the Trudeau government set a target to reduce the emissions from fertiliser application by 30% by 2030.
To be honest, it kind of caught everyone in the industry off guard. I wouldn't say anyone anticipated this kind of announcement, and to date, it appears to be met with somewhat of a mixture of confusion, frustration, and for some people, hostility.
Alberta-based journalist Trevor Back is following the policy.
Now, what's interesting about this is these are voluntary targets, and farmers obviously need fertilizer to have a successful crop. And so with the word voluntary in the language there, no one's really sure why they would reduce the fertilizer if they need it. So that's what's caused some confusion among the ag industry. We have all types of agriculture in Canada, but the grain sector is massive, billions, tens of billions of dollars. And so the idea that farmers would not necessarily be able to use their desired quantity of fertilizer, their primary input, is a frightening prospect for many.
For now, Trevor says the policy has stalled.
Industry came out after the government said 30%, and they published a paper and they said the best we can do is 16%. And after that, there's been a bit of a standstill. Nothing really has been happening.
The Australian government's working on a plan to reduce agricultural emissions as part of its net zero by 2050 commitment. It's unclear what could be in that. For now, the government hasn't really said anything about changes to fertiliser application on farms, but there's some concern that that could change.
The risk I see for Australia is that the government may copy what's been done in other countries. That isn't necessarily the blueprint for Australia.
Stephen Annals is from the industry body Fertiliser Australia.
If they were to copy what other countries are doing, what other jurisdictions are doing, the solution might have some undesired effects and may not have the effect that they actually want.
Could you elaborate on those undesired effects?
Lower yields, less food production, and potentially lower exports for Australia.
So has fertiliser become a dirty word?
In some circles, yes. There are some movements that see there's no need for fertiliser, but those are very, very small enterprises, and largely in enterprises where fertiliser hasn't been a great player, such as some of the grazing industries, broadacre grazing industries, where some of these practices have been practiced for many, many years. But with broadacre cropping and with horticulture and with most other things where you're deliberately growing plants, you need fertiliser.
Good boy. Good boy.
We do post-emergence, which is your super, the old super, and we put urea out just after seeding.
For Sally Zacher, applying fertiliser to crops on her South Australian farm is a no-brainer.
So if we didn't have access to fertiliser, we just wouldn't make money, really. It comes down to it. We need the fertiliser to capitalise on our cropping potential.
The Ukraine war, sanctions imposed on Belarus, China's domestic reservation policy and huge gas prices contributed to Australian fertiliser prices soaring more than 180% between January 2020 and last September.
Last year, the fertiliser was so expensive.
While prices have eased since, Sally says she never considered not applying the fert.
We didn't see it as an option of not buying it. We just took the brunt and paid for it, urea and super, and we wouldn't have had the crops we ended up with, which were the best on record. So I just don't know where we'd be if we couldn't get a hold of fertiliser. We'd find it somehow and pay for it, no matter what it had cost us.
Australian farmers applied a record 7 million tonnes of N, P and K combined in 2021. According to industry, that's about 1% of the world's fertiliser use.
We do have to put fertiliser into our farming systems to have effective production of those farming systems. Otherwise, we'd run down production very significantly and very quickly. And at the moment, we can't put on that fertiliser without some greenhouse gas footprint, either pre-farm or on-farm. And so it essentially comes with the territory of food production. So what we need to do is put in place efficiency measures so we can actually use less fertiliser to get the same amount of food production. And we also need to look at research and development.
Fertiliser remains big business. The global industry is expected to be worth around $166 billion by 2027. An Indonesian company is now seeking approval for a $1.5 billion takeover of Australia's largest fertiliser manufacturer and distributor, Incitec Pivot. While Nutrien, listed on the New York and Toronto stock exchanges, supplies about 15 million tonnes of potash and another 12 million tonnes of nitrogen and phosphate combined, making it one of, if not the, biggest fertiliser company in the world.
This should be coming up any moment.
90 seconds from the bottom of the mine up here.
Back at its mine outside Saskatoon, potash is being processed almost as quickly as it reaches the surface.
Very tall bin. I think that's just a little shy of 50 tonnes.
So every 90 seconds, a new bin, 24 hours a day, almost every day of the year.
Yeah.
The company claims to have many decades of potash reserves. Australian farmers will apply about 300,000 tonnes this year.
It can make 2 million tonnes a year, and with capacity to continue to increase.
Yeah.
And the global market is only 70 million.
Tim Barnstable is in charge of the mine's surface operations.
Our site, like our milling process, has about 1,100 rotating pieces of equipment and 8,000 instruments so that we can automate it.
The ore is put through a series of centrifuges and dryers.
Potash processing is actually very efficient. In one step, we're getting about 85% of the material recovered, as well as it's already at product quality.
So you could put that on a farm?
Yeah, you could put it on a farm right now.
Once it's through the mill, the potash can be loaded onto trains for export via the port of Vancouver.
You can get a rail car loaded in about 6 minutes, and so it's basically just open the hatches, move it into place, dump, 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 close the hatches, move it along, next rail car. So it's pretty quick. It allows us lots of flexibility on loading the different product. We have about 70 to 80,000 tons of product in inventory, and the latest price is around $307, so it adds up pretty quick.
The numbers are staggering, but for growers like Sally, the ability to use fertiliser is about more than dollars and cents.
Farmers have been improving their farming practices forever. If we can't get fertiliser, then our crop yields go down, our viability goes down, and we can't grow the world crop. That's really, we need fertiliser to grow a world crop to feed everybody. Simple.
Hi, I'm Helena. Cow poo is par for the course in a feedlot. What's not usual is turning it into a high-grade organic fertiliser. One company in Queensland has figured out how. That story next week on Landline.
Hi, I'm Jane Norman. The nation's energy market regulator has issued a strident warning about the massive challenges Australia's facing keeping the lights on as it transitions away from fossil fuels. South Australia and Victoria are at an elevated risk of blackouts this summer because of the hot, dry and windless conditions forecast, combined with a fleet of coal-fired power stations that are ageing and less reliable. That's the short term. Longer term, the regulator warns of reliability gaps across the network because new renewable projects aren't being approved quickly enough to replace the shortfall created by the closure of coal and gas-fired power stations. Some projects that have been approved are facing delays and cost blowouts, with community opposition to new transmission lines proving to be the biggest bottleneck in the transition.
There are issues to be worked through with communities. Community engagement desperately needed to be improved on transmission. These are big pieces of infrastructure going through communities, and communities did not have enough visibility, enough real consultation and enough say.
The federal government wants 82% of Australia's power to come from renewable sources by the end of the decade, up from about 37% now. Australia's reliance on Pacific workers to fill labour shortages on farms is starting to cause some anxiety among our nearest neighbours. The Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme is now drawing in more than 35,000 workers on both short and longer-term contracts, leading the Australian government to hail it a success. But that's not the view of some Pacific nations. Tonga and Vanuatu have raised concerns about the exodus of workers, while Samoa's Prime Minister is worried about the program's underlying dynamics.
It could be seen that somehow, we're just these outposts where we grow people, either to send them off as sports people or to send them off as labour, labour mobility teams and so forth, as though that's our lot in life.
A survey from Australia's horticulture industry this week suggested 70% of farmers are experiencing workforce shortages. Well, across the country, rural and remote maternity services are continuing to close, causing a great deal of stress for both mothers and their babies. The reasons are well known: workforce shortages and a lack of funding. But this week, leading rural health professionals gathered in Canberra to come up with some solutions. The delegates put forward ideas to improve the experience for women, and their one wish is for this issue to be put on the National Cabinet agenda. I spoke to the Rural Health Commissioner, Ruth Stewart.
We want the government to place a priority on rural maternity care. And we know that they can do that by placing it on the agenda of the National Cabinet and making it an item in the National Health Reform Agreement that is being renegotiated. We want the 80 people in the room placed highest priority on birthing for First Nations women being culturally safe and on country.
What do First Nations women want when they give birth?
Look, the major thing is they want respect. Respect for culture and respect for themselves and their babies. And so if a First Nation woman says that there's something that's, culturally appropriate, that should be given priority. It's not a little issue that can be dismissed. It should be respected, and as the women and their families should be respected. I've always been very impressed by statements from elders of First Nations communities about the fact that, yes, you can tell us that that birthing needs to be safe and in a big hospital with all the bells and whistles, but if the birthing service is not culturally safe, then the whole focus of our lives is lost and our lives are without meaning. So birthing on country closes that loop of meaning for First Nations people. It's very important.
You want this to be on the National Cabinet agenda, but as I understand it, not a single government minister actually attended. Does this give you much hope?
I'm not too concerned about that because our purpose yesterday was to come up with solutions that the politicians and the department can implement. It will be their job to listen and we hope that they will value the expertise that we gathered together.
Ruth Stewart, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
And finally to Victoria, where an old dog has some new tricks. When working dog Ali was injured in a farm accident 6 months ago, it seemed her days of mustering sheep were over. But thanks to her owners Paul and Adelaide and a business that builds custom-fitted wheelchairs for dogs, she's got a new lease on life, returning to the paddock once more.
She's stuck in the rushes.
And that's Landline News.
I'm Christy O'Brien in the Northern Territory. Coming up on Landline, life on board a live export shipment. We meet an unexpectedly glamorous and long-serving female stockie.
Selling livestock is big business. The logistics of carting stock around the country, the staggering amount of money flowing in and out, and the thousands of jobs created, well, the list goes on. But what's surprising some sale yards, including the biggest in Australia when it comes to cattle, is the huge number of tourists coming for a look. Here's Landline's Courtney Wilson.
When it comes to buying and selling cattle, in Australia, it doesn't get bigger than this.
Today we've got 6,200 in the yards. A couple of weeks ago we had 10,000 and last month as a month of May, we had one of our higher months for the last 2 years of around the 35,000 cattle throughout here, so it's a large operation.
Those numbers mean plenty of cash flowing in and out of these yards.
There's weeks where this can be a $6 or $8 million sale, and in big times, you know, we're talking $10, $15 million in one day in a transaction. So it's big business, and I don't think people understand the size, the economics in rural Australia.
To understand the logistics of livestock sales, there's no better place to go behind the scenes than the sale yards at Roma in southwestern Queensland. Sales are held here once a week without fail. They're well known and well regarded across the industry.
It's actually one of the reasons that Roma gets mentioned every week all around Australia, because people are checking prices at Roma, and Roma is a price setter.
We call it game day. So all the preparation that's gone on with our clients, working out our markets, what best suits, where we need to sell. Today is the day that all that comes together and we market and sell these cattle.
Of course, the mechanics of selling thousands of head means the hard work begins long before sale day itself. Generally, cattle start arriving on trucks on Sunday night. From a grazier driving their own truck and dropping a few dozen animals to the loading yards, or on the much bigger end of the scale, commercial farming operations which send hundreds of cattle, often thousands of kilometres, on road trains.
We do draw a lot of cattle from interstate, so we've got cattle from Alice Springs here today, but we've also sold cattle from every state in Australia.
Selling cattle requires a livestock agent. There are 8 agencies working here, and their staff draft the cattle into selling pens the night before sale day. There's an art to it too. They're trying to package the animals to fetch the best price overall.
I tell people it's like a bag of Skittles. You get all the colours coming off the truck and then we sort them out Monday night, and they're placed into their weight categories and breed categories and sex categories, and then today we sell them from sort of highest dollar value down to lowest.
Carl Warren has 20 years' experience under his belt, and you'll find him here at Roma most Tuesdays.
At school, my report card said I talk too much in class. You're out. But I've always been in the beef industry. My father was in the meatworks and wholesale meat market, through to property, grew up on a property, so it was a natural transition.
The auctions themselves happen quickly. Pen by pen, all is said and done in about 30 seconds. And you'd be forgiven for watching on and not actually seeing anything much at all. The subtleties involved in selling livestock and the particular quirks of different buyers is something agents have spent some time working out.
There's winks, there's flicks, there's little ticks, there's you name it. There's every buyer's individual, and you get to know that relationship with them. That, you know, sometimes they're walking away and they're 2 pens away and they're still bidding.
There are also professional buyers and buyers who aren't physically at the sale, but on the other end of the phone.
It's because of our time in the industry, we know who's going to buy those cattle or who's interested in that article. So as an auctioneer, that's your job to know these cattle suit buyer A, B and C, and we'll pay attention to that and try and get them involved in the sale.
It's certainly not a one-man band either. Each agency operates a little differently, but usually there are these key roles at the sale yards. There's the stock and station agent, who on the sale day is the auctioneer, or the one doing all the talking. Then there are the spotters. Their job is to pick up on the bids in a frenzy. So they're looking for the winks, the nods, the nose scratches, even the tip of a hat.
Take your point 2, JBS.
The penciler is responsible for the bookkeeping, so noting down the sale prices. The painter is pretty self-explanatory, but why they're painting the cattle may not be. The reason for painting the back of a beast is to identify any individual animals to be sold separately. That may happen for numerous reasons. They could be desirable and so singled out, or identified as having a fault and separated from the so-called better animals. Painted animals are the paint-outs or the splits, and there's another person whose job it is to scan all of those marked cattle.
Every cattle is earmarked with electronic ear tag, and we have technology in here that we split buying pens, and then also when they go across the scales, that technology is there for lot recognition.
The weighing is crucial because their final price is calculated per kilogram. Then they're penned again, ready for picking up. Keeping track of what's going where is quite complex. In Roma, just under 250,000 cattle were sold through these yards in the last financial year. About 50 staff here keep the place ticking over.
It is a logistical challenge, so we're always looking at ways to improve that, and the team here is very experienced and well run. We have 8 different agents that operate out of the sale yards, and they're an integral part of attracting the buyers and also operating the sale day.
Because it is the largest cattle sale yards in the country, there is plenty of interest in what happens here. The prices at Roma often dictate the rest of the market. But it's not just graziers who are keen to see how the sales unfold. There are also plenty of tourists who want a sticky beak. Hundreds of tourists trip through the sale yards each week, guided by volunteers who are mostly all retired graziers from across the region. People like Lloyd Half, who ran a cattle station for 50 years before retiring and moving closer to town. He started taking tours 6 years ago and hasn't looked back.
I got conned into it by a couple of the original tour guides that started up. It's about $1,050 per head.
Lloyd's wealth of experience in the grazing industry means he's able to give tourists a valuable insight into what's really going on at the sale yards.
Before they go in that gate. We have tourists from overseas. Last week I had 2 young girls from Norway. The week before there was 3 men from Norway. We've had people from other European countries and that's come in and have a look around.
The experience is free and attracts all sorts of visitors, and plenty of them.
Today, for example, we've had over 200 tourists and we've had busloads of school children. We've had people caravanning around, and we've also had the general public who are passing through.
The sale yards have been set up in such a way as to allow visitors to get right in amongst the action without actually getting in the way.
We get them down there around the scale area and they just become mesmerised. and the live auction. What did he say? I said, well, when you're buying, you'll soon learn to understand what he said, because it's costing you dollars.
One thing's for sure, in true country style, the guides are honest and open and definitely do not mince their words.
There's 3 bulls over there, they're broken down, they're finished with, so they get their heads chopped off and made into meat pies.
I think everyone realises that what we're trying to achieve here will be useful for the whole industry.
There are around 200 sale yards across the country. Some, like Roma, when it comes to cattle, are huge. When it comes to sheep, Wagga Wagga in New South Wales is the biggest. And there are plenty that fit somewhere in between.
Range down to the likes of Mergen, where you get a handful of stock maybe every fortnight. But doesn't make it any less important in that community.
Ken Rogers is the president of the Australian Livestock Markets Association, the national industry body for sale yard owners and operators. He says in terms of the economic impact of sale yards, their value is unquestionable. Dubbo, for example, injects an estimated $74 million into the gross regional product for that region every year.
But importantly, on top of that, there's the social benefit, which we've recently quantified through a study that shows that sale yards are a hub for rural people and townspeople to meet, exchange ideas, tell their war stories, have their gripes.
It's one place you can normally round up all the blokes that don't like to go to doctors and do all the health stuff. So sometimes they have, the clinics out here and they'll grab someone for blood pressure, and so it's just a great social thing.
Sometimes the socialising is a lifeline.
When we have drought seasons and tough times, it's a hugely emotional part of the industry for those forced sales, and we're also counsellors, in those times of need, because it's a tough thing, especially when things are down.
In better times, when it's been wet and green and things are looking up, it's a battle to see just how high prices will go.
If you can set the record and hold that, but in the last 12 months it was beaten every week, so it was short-lived.
The nature of the industry, which is extremely weather dependent, means it's inevitable that there are high highs and low lows. And that's never been more evident than at the sale yards over the past year.
Our average dollar value now is, on 12 months ago, is less than $1,000. So it's a pretty big shift in a 12-month period. However, if we go back 5 years ago, we're still seeing great prices at present. So if we could just find that happy medium, I think going forwards, we've probably found, hopefully, the bottom of the market, and we just look for a bit more rain and look towards the end of the year to maybe see some strength.
Rain or no rain, the show must go on. And it does, here in Roma, every week.
G'day, I'm Matt Brand. A shipment of barley was loaded in Western Australia this week, bound for China. So it's the first since import tariffs were lifted last month, and there's more to come. I'm told China has already bought around 600,000 tonnes of Australian malt and feed barley.
The two states that were most badly affected by the barley bans by the Chinese were West Australia and South Australia, and I'm so pleased that we've managed to lift those tariffs and give the opportunity to the Chinese consumers, particularly the beer drinkers, to have some of the best barley in the world to make their beer.
I spoke earlier to Jason Craig from CBH Group, which is WA's main grain handler. He says China's return as a customer of Australian barley has lifted prices quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. In Western Australia here, we've seen feed barley prices increase by $50 or $60 and malt prices increase by around about $70. So it's certainly seen a big price increase here, which is quite exciting for the industry.
Jason, how big a customer are you expecting China to be now for Australian barley?
Well, China is the most important customer in the Asian region. It's about 80 to almost 90% of the malting capacity in Asia, and it looks like it'll import somewhere between 7 to 7.5 million tonnes of barley this year from around the world. 4 million tonnes of that is about malting barley, with the remainder being feed barley, and Australia is well positioned to be able to supply a large majority of that.
There's a lot of stories about China's slowing economy. How much of a concern is that for you?
Without doubt. I mean, China has also been Australia's biggest wheat customer for the last few years. So the Chinese economy is really important in terms of, their demand profile, and particularly around barley as well, where barley is predominantly used in the malting industry. And of course, if beer consumption comes off here, we could see a slowing in demand.
And Jason, overall in WA at the moment, how is the winter crop looking?
Well, we've just been through 2 record seasons. This season is looking a little bit more challenging, with quite a bit of a warm weather front at the moment happening. And I think we're going to see probably an average crop to slightly below if we look at the forecast going forward here. That's after 2 record crops. So, we're probably seeing a little bit of a taper off and seeing a season that's going to be a little bit more challenging.
As you mentioned, a record crop last year, and CBH has already exported a record 20 million tonnes of grain for its financial year. That milestone, how did you celebrate it?
Well, that's just only happened last week, and it's been quite an exciting moment for the company, and we're certainly celebrating, mildly inside the company, I guess, with a bit of excitement. But we're also looking very much to what's happening in the future. Strong investment in our supply chain, but also looking to see what happens this year. I think the important thing, though, is, certainly our carryover will be a lot lower than people expected, and that means there's tighter supply and demand here, and therefore I think, we should see prices rise for growers.
That's Jason Craig from CBH. So a look at prices this week, and as Jason mentioned, barley prices are rising in the West, and Aussie wheat is now $80 to almost $100 a tonne in front of global prices. The US corn harvest is getting underway, and although it's facing hot and dry conditions, that's not really reflected in the market. Corn futures declining this week and taking wheat with it. Over the last fortnight, sugar futures have been on the rise, and a big reason for that is India. There's an expectation that India will soon ban its sugar mills from exporting in an effort to protect domestic supplies. India is normally the world's 2nd largest sugar exporter, so if it pulls out, the price will rise, and already sugar futures are back over 25 US cents a pound. A larger wool offering this week, and prices lifted for most categories. 19 micron wool at Sydney lifted 72 cents a kilo. The market in WA, though, was down. To the saleyards, where there's a lot of red ink. Now, there's some decent feed still in paddocks across the eastern states, but these are drought prices. The feeder steer indicator has fallen below $3 a kilo, and the ECI now below $5 for the first time since early 2020. There was a significant rise in the number of sheep and lambs yarded this week, and prices took a hit. At Wagga, supermarkets turned their attention to new season lambs. There wasn't much interest in the old season types. And finally this week, China's economy might be slowing, but its appetite for beef is not. New data shows China imported a record amount of beef in July, close to 300,000 tonnes. Where did it all come from? Well, the answer is Brazil. And according to Global Agri Trends, this is perhaps a sign of a backlog of Brazilian beef being cleared out after that temporary BSE trade ban that happened earlier in the year. China is currently Australia's 2nd biggest customer for beef in 2023. It's our biggest customer for sheep and lamb meat, and now it's back getting barley to make the beer. That is the Landline check on prices. Keep it rural.
life on board a live export ship isn't for everybody, and it certainly isn't known for being glamorous. But meet an exception, Fiona Baird. As Landline's Chrissy O'Brien reports, Fiona has been working on live cattle ships for 13 years.
Fiona Baird's soul has always been most content out bush, whether it be the dusty Northern Territory tracks or highlands across the Tasman.
When I was younger, I wanted to be New Zealand's first female stock agent. I used to stand out at the washing line because we were on a big station and talk to myself as if I was a stock agent.
All the same, landing smack bang in the Northern Territory's repressive climate and wild cattle was an eye-opener.
I didn't have much to do with the cattle when I was younger. I was more involved with the tailing of the sheep. Dad did the cattle work. They were away mustering a lot at the high country. But yeah, huge difference. And the heat, of course. Can you imagine?
This well-groomed, lippy, always firmly on glamour isn't exactly what you'd expect mucking in on board a live export ship.
Good to see you both. Good to see you. How are you? Good to see you. Good to see you. Again. Beautiful.
Got to have the hair high, the lips, and I try to take care of myself. I'm an old woman now, and but you know, I feel good, and I'm feminine. I love girly things. I love fashion, makeup. That's my background. So why not roll into the cattle ships with that, you know?
So good to see you, mate. How are you?
For the past decade, life aboard a ship has been a constant.
I've just kept it real for me, and I thought, well, if I'm going to be good at this, everyone will get right behind me, and if I'm no good, I'm sure I won't last very long. So here I am, still 13 years later.
She's sailed extensively throughout Asia, a few days, even weeks at a time. During COVID, she was on board for up to 54 days on back-to-back voyages.
This is where everybody eats. Often we'll get together and have a bit of singing, a bit of karaoke. So yeah, this is just where the mess hall, we call it mess room, and make your coffee here, eat your dinner. I had no idea that this sort of really existed. Working in the export yards, some of the exporters had mentioned to me, you should jump on a ship and give it a go. I think, you know, we think you'd be good. And that's how I started, is they put me on a ship. I think I took, I can't remember now if it was 26,000 head up to Jakarta and Panjang.
But how she came to be on deck wasn't your usual recruitment drive. And it was an unusual proposition.
So I loaded from the export depot, and then everybody from the yards and the vets and all my mates came down to the wharf to see me off. They brought a box of beer, and it was a big event. You know, a girl going on a boat back then, a young girl.
And while she was very much the Lone Ranger as a female stocky, she learned to hold her own amongst what could be up to 100 blokes.
I've been on boats where the captain wouldn't even converse with me. And I've ended up having to really run my own show. And it's hard when the captain's not on your side. That was back in the early days. And by the end of that voyage, I was cutting his hair and we were talking about each other's lives and we bonded, and he said to me, I'm so sorry, I've just never had a woman tell us what to do. So that was something I had to deal with and navigate in the early days, yeah. We'll run through a few bits and pieces. Thank you. Okay. So what do we got here, Chief? Perfect.
On board, preparation is everything. Once at sea, help and port is a long way.
There's one.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. Okay, great. Yep, and we've got our space on each deck for our hospitals. Perfect. It's looking good. Being a nice load.
Living at sea isn't for everyone, but the stockies make it as homely as possible.
This is the cabin for the stockman. Obviously, this is my trusty bunk. Oh, I see they've put a new mattress on for me. You beauty.
She says what will always determine a good or at least enjoyable voyage is the people.
Cookie Monster!
Sorry.
Woohoo! Cookie!
How are you?
Great to see you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm still working.
Doing your thing. I brought you some goodies. We've got some cake mixes. Chockies. Oh, yeah.
They've become tight-knit and apt at finding ways to make the time pass. Many of the predominantly Filipino workers can spend up to half a year at sea, but it's considered a lucrative job.
The people that could have gone under the radar, they've been given an opportunity that they might not ordinarily have had with live export. So we're providing jobs not within Australia, but throughout the world. And a lot of the guys that I sail with, they're putting 10 kids through school. They're supporting 15 people back home.
On board this ship are 2,700 cattle sailing to Jakarta in Indonesia, which takes them about 6 days. The well-being of every animal is entirely in her care.
So I've always walked onto the ship as if the animals are my own. The welfare side of things very important, not just for myself, the importer or the exporter, but also for the producer that sold us the animals to take into the importing markets. I need them to know that their cattle are safe and well looked after also.
Her day-to-day varies from vet-style work to more traditional stock skills.
The guys feed the cattle, water, and I check all the animals one by one, and it's very methodical. And then every day's different. You know, I could have a really easy day, or I could have a day where I'm going to have to pull out a few cattle, spread them. A few cattle might need a bit of chaff, a bit of TLC. But yeah, every day's very different. But it's a managerial role, basically. You're managing the ship. Yeah.
The buck doesn't stop on board either. At the other end, a smooth unload is also under her domain.
Yeah.
It isn't without hazards. Wild weather, remoteness and pirates, all a very real threat.
Through the Basilan Strait, a lot of the ships that go up into the Middle East carry an armed guard. They're going through pirated areas. I've had experience in my early days up in Sumatra, just young guys coming on board wanting to take the aluminium.
But her greatest fear is far simpler.
One thing that I worry about is getting sick on the boat if something happened to me. I have been on board where someone has actually passed away from sickness, a crew member, and it was scary. It was really scary.
She says it was once a far more dangerous and unsupported job, but changes are afoot, with better access to affordable insurance and conditions for stockies. But it isn't an industry without its challenges, particularly around animal welfare concern. In 2011, they prompted the trade to be halted overnight.
What was sad was seeing the importing staff. They were devastated. You know, during my time in this industry, I don't think I've met a cruel person, but I have met people that have had a bad day, and I think there's a huge difference. And so I've been lucky to see such amazing change since 2011 as well.
She says she can categorically stand behind the trade and is proud of how much has been done to ensure animal welfare.
The biggest myth of Australian live export is that the ships are death ships, which they are absolutely not, and that would just be bad business to put animals on a ship to just die. I think people are absolutely the wrong idea about the actual vessels, and I wouldn't tolerate it if it was. I would be saying something, doing something as much as I could if it was like that, and it's not.
Not one to stop when not at sea, she spends her free time on another passion, fashion. She's even started her own label, Apple Tree Flat, stemming from the loss of her father.
It started initially because my father had the melanoma. I wanted to cover myself up a bit more. I wanted to offer women something a little bit more feminine to cover up the décolletage.
Making things like shirts and kerchiefs was also a chance to create employment for the many women she'd met working in Asia that sorely needed employment.
I started Apple Tree Flat 4 years ago. I spent a lot of time working in market, setting up facilities, training local team members in the facilities, and while I was over there I met a lot of young women that have been doing it a bit tough. My team are just girls that would have been unrecognised otherwise, and I'm so proud of them. Oh, I'm getting emotional. Sorry.
She's a woman all about lifting others up, whether it be in the sewing chair or cattle pen. And what's perhaps most heartening is how much she says equality has permeated the ranks.
And I mean, I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but the people that have surrounded me and mentored me and supported me, I've had the best in the business. So I've been very lucky from the day dot.
As for parting wisdom to anyone thinking of getting on board,
no one drops lip, we just get it done, yeah. So I think you definitely do need to be a special breed, yeah. Just whatever, I'm happy with whatever, I can't wait.
a dynamo of optimism who has really found her calling. Maybe not as that New Zealand stock agent, but a mighty force all the same.
I would say to any young woman who's really just battling to make it right now, just chill out and get some experience and make a few stuff-ups and you'll get to where you need to be.
Well, I'm packed up, ready to go. The bed can't even get cold around here. The next stockman's on already and he's loading, so it was great to see him. Just finishing my cleaning. It was a great voyage. Nil mortality, which is completely normal. Cattle came off looking really good. The Indonesian guys are going to take it from there. And I'm getting ready to jump on another one. In the meantime, I've left my friend Nolio, the stockman, a little note in the shade of coral. Cheers, everyone.
You've got to say she's an exceptional woman. And that's the show for today, but stay tuned for the all-important monthly climate report from the Bureau. From all the team, we look forward to seeing you next time on Landline. Bye for now.
Welcome to the Bureau's long-range forecast for spring 2023. After what looks to be our warmest winter on record, spring is also likely to bring warmer days and reduced rainfall. Let's look at recent conditions. Winter has been much drier than usual for many areas, including in the southwest and parts of the east. Large areas of northern and central Australia had above average rainfall over the winter months, mostly due to unseasonal rain in late June and early July. For Australia as a whole, rainfall this winter is tracking at around 8% below average. Winter has been warmer than average almost everywhere, except the southwest corner of WA. Overall, Australia is on track to have its warmest winter on record, with the national mean temperature around 1.5 degrees above average. Soil moisture is now very much above average across large areas of the north and some central regions, but soils are drying out in large parts of the east and some southern areas where there's been lower rainfall. Combined, Australia's water storages are close to 80% full. Many are more than 90% full. However, some storages are dropping below 50%. The long-range forecast for spring shows a high chance of below-average rainfall for most of Australia. This is very different to last year's wetter forecast for spring. Last year, spring was the second wettest on record. 2023 is looking different. Many areas have an increased chance of an unusually dry spring, with the highest chances in the southwest and parts of the east. The first rains of northern Australia's wet season are likely to be later than normal, especially for the Northern Territory and Queensland. Over the coming months, with the drier forecast and soils drying out, near-median stream flow is likely for the majority of sites. Low to normal flow is forecast for most other areas. Most of the country has a high chance of daytime temperatures that are warmer than usual this spring. There's an increased chance of unusually warm days for almost all areas, especially in WA and parts of the southeast. Large areas are also very likely to have warmer than usual overnight temperatures. So what's likely to influence our climate over the coming months? We remain at El Niño alert, as it is likely an El Niño will develop this year. Sea surface temperatures are forecast to keep warming above El Niño levels. Sea surface temperatures indicate a positive Indian Ocean dipole is likely to form during spring, which can result in below average rainfall for southern and central Australia. July was the warmest month on record globally when including land and ocean temperatures. We know that a warmer climate increases the risk of extreme weather like heat waves. The outlook from the Australian fire agencies shows an increased fire risk for large areas of New South Wales, Queensland and the NT, plus parts of Victoria and South Australia. There's always a risk of dangerous and destructive fires in Australia during spring. With warm weather, grasses can quickly dry out and increase the risk of fast-moving fires, including near urban areas. Now is the time to prepare and review your bushfire plan wherever you are. In summary, the forecast for spring shows below average rainfall, warmer than usual temperatures, and an increased fire risk for large areas. You can find the latest long-range forecasts on the Bureau's website. Bye for now.